Hello. We have always been gamers. Since the earliest days of mankind, there have been games to play. But it wasn't until the 70s that we would get to play Dungeons and Dragons. There is plenty of evidence to suggest that cooperative storytelling games like D&D and other role-playing games can be incredible sources of therapy, that they can help people to overcome all sorts of challenges. And that is why my guest today helped to found Game Therapy UK, to research and support incredible projects that use tabletop gaming as an innovative, evidence-based approach to address social isolation, trauma, and to aid recovery. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with Dr. Gary Colman. Gary, thank you for joining me. I wanted to start by just exploring a little bit of your history with tabletop gaming. How did you get started?
Well, I started when I was a kid, so this would be in the 70s, I guess. I look much younger, I know.
You do.
So in the 70s, I started as a kid, and it would be Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
And so when I was a kid, I grew up in the Northeast, and there was a model shop, and they had like a little glass cabinet, and they had maybe like 4 or 5 little lead miniature figures in there, and
Right.
they have the old blue book in there, and bits and bobs. And for ages, I would just go and I had no idea what it was. I had no idea what this thing, Dungeons and Dragons, was, but I just knew that it would be something I would love. And I just go and stare. It's like an icon. I just go and stare at this and imagine how I would play it. And for months and months. But of course, it's a game where you have to have other people playing it with you, and I didn't know anybody. And then I remember, I don't know, maybe like 6 months later, maybe a year, I don't know. I was in a lesson, a music lesson, and a kid who I didn't really know that well wandered into class, and he had a cellophane wrapped blue book in his
Right.
hand. And so I just sidled over and started talking to him, and we started playing D&D from there. So I was probably like sort of 12, maybe 13 or something like that. As a kid.
Great. Wow. Would that have been so that was the UK republished Dungeons and Dragons, the blue one, wasn't it? Was that Games Workshop, I think?
Oh, I don't know.
I think it might have been with
Might
a
have
John
been.
Blanche cover as
Right.
well. But
Maybe,
then,
maybe, maybe.
so did you
It
get,
came in a box. It was a little box set. It was a
I think
cardboard box.
so. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
cardboard
right.
box. I've still got the dice from it.
Oh, wow.
I would love. Yeah, I've still got the old-fashioned dice from it. We had to sort of paint on the colors and things.
Sure.
It
Right.
was all, yeah, the D20 didn't have different colors. Um, yeah, just yeah. A
That's
long
great.
time
So,
ago.
so did you start playing D&D then with this new friend who had a
So we
copy?
started playing, yeah. So I started playing with, so there's then two of us. There's now, you still can't really play. There's two of us. And we didn't know any geeks who we knew in our school who would play. But he said one of his neighbors who went to a different school, a grammar school, well, I was at a comprehensive school. He knew a neighbor at a grammar school, and he thought he might want to play. So he enrolled his friend, who then became obviously our friend, and then his little brother just got co-opted in to make the numbers up, against his will, bullied into playing. And then we just played. That was it for the next 8 years. Every week played D&D.
Fantastic.
At least once a week during the week, and then weekends, for 12 hours, eight, whatever, just played forever. We just got totally into it. And around this sort of time as well, it was D&D, but also um, White Dwarf. This is like the first sort of issues of White Dwarf. So in
Right.
White Dwarf, there'd be other games as well. It was pre Warhammer, wasn't it? It was
Sure.
it was just, and so we'd get White Dwarf to get the games, to play the games, but also like Cthulhu was in there and RuneQuest were in there, Traveller. So we then ended up playing other games as well, but it was mainly D&D, to be honest, that we played as kids.
Yeah. Do you remember much of those games? Like this, what kind of stories you were doing? Were they dungeon dives? Were they sort of different settings? Or because it was
So
early
yeah,
days, right? So
so the box set came with a game called Into the Unknown,
right.
which is really basic. And I have actually still got the game. I've got that game. And so when my kids came along, um, I trained them. I trained them in first edition D&D. I wasn't playing fifth edition. I was kind of in a 3.5 game. But I
Right.
GM, it's still GM first edition. That was my version of the game. Um, and then my kids came along, and I played Into the Unknown, this game that I played as a 12-year-old. I played with my 12-year-old kids. Sorry, my cats are fighting. Um, so I kind of revisit this game. It's crazy. So you look at these, you think of how, what a published game looks now. The game, half of it was empty. It was just blank rooms, empty, and you had to fill in the rooms yourself. You had to write the rooms, which I think is a brilliant idea. So back then, my introduction to the game was you had a bit of a game, a bit of a story, but a lot of it was creating your own game as well, really,
Mm.
your content, which I think is a good thing. Rather,
Yeah.
rather than being a consumer of things that you buy, I think from the get-go, it was you make up a lot of your own rules because nobody really understood the rules, and you made up your own games. So I think we were buying games, buying magazines, but also I think from the start you were writing your own games as well because you
Yeah.
had to. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, do you, because obviously as we grow up and we get a career and a job, there's some of the gaming falls to the side there. I mean, you mentioned that you're still games mastering. I mean, did you continue playing games as you pursued a professional career?
Yeah, largely. So largely, I haven't had a very professional career, so that's helped. So when I went to as I played as a kid, it was my life. It was literally my social life was games. So I wasn't really into sports at all. And then I left. I went off to university, and happily there were other folk at university I could play with. And I think we were just mainly we played some board games as well. Oh gosh, what was the one with them? The cars, Car Wars. Remember games?
Sure.
Remember
Yeah.
Car? We played loads of Car Wars, but also D&D as well, and probably Cthulhu, I think.
Hmm.
So I played through that, and then I went off and I was in the army, and the army was quite a fallow period. I didn't know
Right.
anybody in the army who played D&D. There may well have been, but I've been too embarrassed to say, hey guys. That's actually not true. I remember once playing a table. There's like a tabletop version of um some sort of like Space Marines. It must be like a Games Workshop thing. I'm thinking.
Right.
I remember playing that, and we were kind of playing it as more like a military strategy type thing. Like skirmishing through as if we were soldiers.
Right.
We were soldiers, but doing that. But that was a one-off event. Um, so that was kind of a fallow time. And then when I left the army, I just started playing again. And by then it was like 3.5, and I, I kind of started playing 3.5, I think, as a
Right.
player. Just, GMing still go back to homebrew games and old school rules.
Sure. Great stuff. I mean, then how did you come to a place of almost discovery, I suppose, of using games to as a sort of therapeutic approach for mental health challenges and sort of exploring that kind of world, the mental health aspect of game playing?
Yeah, so it was, I mean, I think anybody who plays games recognizes the benefit. They might not use the word therapy or therapeutic, but they just recognize the benefit of playing games. I mean, looking back on me as a kid, I mean, I didn't have that many, I didn't have a huge group of friends, and the friends I did have was really through playing these games. And so, in hindsight, looking back, I could see the benefit as therapeutically as a kid. Um, I was I work as a doctor. I still work 1 day a week as a doctor, and I work doing with people experiencing homelessness. I do a project
Right.
doing end of life care for people experiencing homelessness in London. And I'd always been aware that there was this thing in America, really the American version of which they were kind of calling geek therapy or D&D therapy. That there was this thing where that D&D was being used. I'm saying D&D and games, but primarily it was D&D I was reading about, but it was being used therapeutically. And they seem to be talking about it being used a lot for either adults or young people with neurodivergent,
Right.
or possibly with trauma, or the common mental health conditions. And I was just curious. I just thought, I've got a group of people, my patients who had experienced a life of trauma, and also neurodivergence is really overrepresented in people experiencing homelessness. And I just wondered whether it would be useful to do a game. What the impact of doing a game would be. So my plan originally, and this was during COVID as well. So I think I was doing a lot of I wear lots of hats. I was doing lots of other things, and all of those other things had pretty much stopped because of COVID. Apart from the medicine, that was still allowed. I was still allowed to go out and do that.
Mm.
Um, and so I just was curious. I thought, I wonder if I set up a little game with 4 or 5 clients, people experiencing homelessness, and we just played a game once a week, whether that would be a benefit to them.
Mm.
And at this time, I was on social media like Facebook and things like that, and I was just reaching out to people who might have had similar experience in the UK rather than America, because I think I was a bit cynical because I was reading about what they were saying in America and some of the research that was coming out of America, and the research was tiny numbers.
Mm.
It was the research was done on literally a clinician, and they played a game with 3 or 4 clients, and they were publishing it. And I was thinking, and I was aware that that clinician in America, they have a very different healthcare system, and that
Right.
clinician was working in the marketplace. Basically, you're paying for your healthcare.
Sure.
You're playing just like. I was thinking, is this research or is this just marketing? Are they just
Mm.
marketing themselves? So I was slightly cynical, and I was curious as to whether it would work or not. So we set up a project for people experiencing homelessness. The first thing you need on an adventure is obviously fellow adventurers. And again, it's like back in the old days of just me and the blue book. I had nobody who I knew. I haven't got many friends. This is definitely a theme of my life. I need more friends. And I did reach out to somebody, and then I got introduced to somebody else, and then they said, "This is like all these different links." And then somebody said, "There is actually, I know a guy who works with people experiencing homelessness in London. You should speak to him."
Mm.
So he gave me this email, and the guy's email was a bloke I was working with. I saw him every week. I used to visit his hostel every week. We had no idea. We were both played D&D. We were both thinking about the same idea. So this other guy was Finbar Westall, who's one of our trustees, one of the founding trustees. So the pair of us, we started this game for people experiencing homelessness. And out of that, the whole Game Therapy UK charity grew. We just kept, we kept hearing other people. Sorry, I can't tell a short story. I do waffle on a bit.
That's good.
We met other people who were doing similar things. So they were occupational therapists working with young people in pupil referral units who were saying anecdotally, it's really profound. The changes are amazing, but they couldn't get any funding. It was all a bit out there, Dungeons and Dragons and playing with kids and
Sure.
things, or people playing with young people, autistic young people. And again, they were saying it's really, really important, the work that they're doing, but they couldn't get funding. It was just a bit sort of bizarre. And there was no real good research to support it. So we recognized that it would be really useful to have an umbrella organization that could support projects, that could spread the evidence base of what's the best practice, because everyone was kind of reinventing the wheel themselves, working in isolation. So myself and Finbar and all these other clinicians and occupational therapists and psychologists, we kind of got together and we set up this kind of very cooperative, collegiate organization to support people. And there are just so many people out there who are interested in therapeutic gaming in the
Right.
UK.
I mean, what are the sort of benefits that you see from it then? So how can you mentioned that some people would see these incredible sort of changes in some of the people taking part. I mean, what sort of things is it helping to achieve?
Well, I think any game, just games themselves are play is a very human thing. There's a very desire, I think, for humans to play. And if you look at complex animals that live in groups, packs of wolves or whatever, or dogs. I've got my dog here, he's snuffling around, he's playing away. Complex animals with big brains, they play. It's an important evolutionary thing. They play in order to learn safely. I think humans are unusual in that as we grow and become adults, we continue to play. It's not just a childish thing. It's something we do our whole life. And it's really important to us. And so that's there's a benefit there. There's an inherent benefit in play. It allows you to experiment, to try things safely. If you make a mistake, it's just a game. But the lessons you learn are real lessons. And in a game, you wind the clock back and go, let's try that again. So that's a real benefit of play in terms of learning. It's also very incredibly creative. Again, with our big human brains, we're naturally creative. We have this instinct to create things and tell stories. We're storytellers. So they're just they kind of itch just natural human innate scratches for all of us. And then if you look at people, if you look at the projects that we're doing, people who might have various vulnerabilities, I think one of the thing is isolation, social isolation. And again, it definitely, I mean, I never felt isolated. I was a very happy kid and a very happy family. But when you look back and you reflect upon it, I mean, my childhood was definitely playing games was hugely fulfilling. And if I hadn't have played those games, my childhood would have been less. It would have been emptier. So I think combating social isolation is something that we see in all of our projects that we do. And that's incredibly valuable.
Mm.
I mean, that's hugely valuable. We were talking before we started this about, we recently were both at a convention and just being out there with all of those all those hundreds, thousands of people just come together and geek out. It's just joyous, isn't it? It's brilliant. I
Yeah.
mean, and this just chatting, I mean, it's so important. And then if you look at sort of specific projects where you can then kind of get into specifics of it. So if you're doing a project we have a project for military veterans, and we were speaking to the NHS veterans about that, and they're very interested in using the games specifically, kind of purposefully to manage some of the challenges caused by post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health conditions caused by military service. So that would be other common mental health disorders, anxiety, depression, addiction, maybe, and it's the same. We have a project for people experiencing homelessness. Again, there's lots of things that playing a game can help with.
Would those games be tailored in any way? Would you be exploring specific scenarios or events or sort of dynamics, or would it just be, is it beneficial to literally just play, could you play the same game, the same scenario, the same campaign with any of these different groups of vulnerable people and achieve the same benefits purely from the act of play? Or do you need to do some sort of like tailoring within it?
Well, I think a bit of both. I think our position, the Game Therapy UK's position at the moment seems to be that all games are potentially therapeutic. There's something inherently therapeutic about playing a game. You definitely do not have to be a psychologist or a clinical psychologist or a doctor or any kind of expert to play a game therapeutically. You just need to play the game. But I think you do need to play it thoughtfully. And I'm a doctor, that's my background. I've got a kind of a medical model, I suppose. And in medicine, we know that if you're looking at a drug or a therapy, hopefully it's beneficial, but any therapy can be harmful. And generally, if something doesn't have a harm, it's probably not beneficial. It's probably made up, So anything like, an aspirin or a paracetamol, they don't cause much harm, but they can cause harm.
Sure.
And it's the same with a game. I mean, a game, if it has if it has if it has an affect, it probably has a side effect as well, potentially.
Right.
And so I think most of us play our games thoughtfully and compassionately and kindly. But you can also play a game thoughtlessly and with cruelty. I've never ever been in a game like that. But if you go on social media, you'll find threads where you get people saying, "Oh my word, I'm in this game," and you read about it and you go, "That sounds so toxic." And people hopefully sensibly are going, "Get out the game. That's just you. There's somebody in there who is being very thoughtless." So it's a bit of both. I think games. I think also as a charity, we are game agnostic. We don't. We're interested in all games. I mean, we're mainly looking at tabletop role-playing games at the moment because you have to start somewhere. You can't do everything at once. So we're starting with tabletop role-playing games. We also get funding from a video game charity, and we are looking at video games as well. And of course, there's a huge overlap now. Things like Baldur's Gate. What's a tabletop role-playing game? What's a video game? It's hard to tell. We're looking at other tabletop games as well, apart from the role-playing games. We're interested in those. Whether it's tabletop kind of wargaming or tabletop just board games, card games. So we're interested in all of those things, and I'm sure they're all beneficial. I think the role-playing games is mainly because that's what I played. I think it's as simple as that. But I think there is something about the complexity of a role-playing game that is helpful. And also, if you're looking at vulnerable groups, I mean, any game overcomes social isolation, but I think for some of the groups, they have challenges with dealing with other people sometimes. And if you
Sure.
do role playing, if you do a cooperative game, I think cooperation is actually very difficult for people to do sometimes. And if
Hmm.
you practice that, if you model cooperation, that can be a really helpful learning thing for some
Yeah.
groups.
Yeah, because
Um,
I imagine that because it is I mean, I approach a role playing game as a collaborative storytelling
yeah,
opportunity, and that
yeah,
sort of almost the game mechanics for me, at least, come second to that opportunity to explore a tale
absolutely. I
together.
totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah, so I'm guessing that that's a slightly different thing and that is offering a slightly different experience, certainly from a therapeutic perspective, to perhaps a more antagonistic game. So, if you're playing a sort of competitive game of 40K or Warhammer, for instance,
Yeah.
that's obviously there's going to be, I assume, benefits to that in a different way, but it might present sort of it's going to be useful for different groups and different types of
Yeah.
individuals, I guess.
Yeah. So again, I think humans do a lot of the games that we play, and I'm not talking about us as kind of geeks playing tabletop games, but games like football or sports,
Sure.
things like that. They're hugely beneficial. They're hugely
Mm.
therapeutic, but they're also incredibly competitive as well.
Mm.
And the competitive element can be helpful. Society kind of values competition, but it kind of, on a personal level, I suppose it can also be harmful as well. But if a lot of these games are team games, so again,
Mm.
you're collaborating in a team, but then you're in opposition with, you know, uh, an enemy
Sure.
or somebody you have to overcome. And that kind of cooperative bit, that tribal bit of coming together is very helpful.
Sure.
Um, and in a role playing game, that's all you get, isn't it? Because the enemy doesn't really exist; it's imaginary. So the real people who you're dealing with are on your side. The
Mm.
enemy is totally imaginary. So
Yeah.
that's helpful, I think. And the challenges again, the reasons why going back to kind of that evolutionary, if people are interested in the kind of evolutionary anthropological level, the reason why we've got big brains, I think, isn't because we had to go out and hunt and kill and do things. We've got big brains because we have to cooperate.
Mm.
That's why we're intelligent, is because we have to deal with other humans. That's the challenge. It's not killing gazelle. It's speaking
Sure.
to people. That's the hard part. And again, therapeutically, I think one of the biggest challenges that people sometimes have is, how do I deal with other people?
Mm.
And you can model that in a cooperative game. Whereas if it's just competitive, it can just sometimes get, again, the risk is it gets a bit toxic, can't it?
Sure.
I suppose. Yeah.
I wonder if there's something in. I know they're less readily available, but some of those older editions of certain games, like 40K or Warhammer Fantasy, even
Mm.
actually had a role play sort of element, and they had a games master, and you could create those. You could create collaborative, cooperative games where you're playing against a GM. There's a,
Mm.
a sort of a set of
Mm.
monsters that you have to fight.
Mm.
I also wondered about the sort of the other aspects of a hobby like a miniatures game. I mean, I'm just coming from it because
Mm.
I'll play role playing games where I also play a lot of
Yeah.
miniatures games. And you hear a lot of people talk about the act of painting as being quite
Oh
a
my
sort of
word.
meditative or
Yes.
therapeutic kind of thing.
Yeah.
Is there anything in those kinds of areas that you think you'd explore?
Definitely. And that's a huge area. That is itself a huge area. So I mean, my I can't paint. I do paint, but I can't paint. I'm rubbish at it.
Right.
But I do enjoy it. I really do enjoy it. And so the two people who the sort of two stories I've got. One is, so when we were playing, when I was I GM at the moment with through the charity with some people experiencing homelessness in Camden, and that's my sort of one of my regular games.
Mm.
We had a professional GM come in, and he was working with us for ages. It's a guy, I don't know if you know him, Rupert Grayling from the Goblin's Chest. So he was one of our volunteers, and he still
Right.
volunteers. He was brilliant, but he is, apart from being a brilliant GM, he is also this incredible painter. Incredible.
Right.
Just so annoys me. He's so good. And what he introduced was, so he was GMing, and I was lucky enough to be sitting as a player in the group. And he would just give us all miniature figures to paint as we're playing a game, which I'd never done before.
Right.
And it's just so mindful. It's brilliant. I suppose it's equivalent to sort of knitting, isn't it? Your
Mm.
hands are doing something, and it's just enough attention to kind of just distract you a little bit, but it doesn't require your entire focus where you
Sure.
can't concentrate. And I'd never done it before. And just again, on a personal level, it was just so kind of soothing. It just felt so lovely to be playing a game which requires your attention. And the games are often bits of time where somebody else has the center of attention, and you're just kind of sitting, really, aren't you, waiting for your turn.
Sure.
And you got this miniature figure, and I was painting away, and I personally thought this feels really lovely.
Hmm.
So there was that. The other thing is we've got another volunteer with the charity, a forensic psychiatrist, Joe Stameyer, and he is big into wargaming, and his thing is painting miniatures. And again, he's like a pro level painter. But he talks loads about the therapeutic benefits of painting. And I think there's a lot of things about speed painting, how fast you
Sure.
can paint a figure.
Yeah.
And he talks about slow painting as well, just how slowly you can have specifically. And you should get him on and chat about I know he's an expert on the sort of the psychological elements of painting. But there's loads of evidence, and we're doing projects in that. We're very, very interested in the benefit of painting.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, definitely. So pick up a paintbrush and paint a miniature figure.
Sure. I mean, you
Good for your
mentioned
mental
before
health.
about that, you see online some almost horror stories about the toxicity that people get into in some
Mm,
games that can exist out there. And
mm,
obviously, over the last number of years, there's been an increase in things like sensitivity tools and sort of ways to
mm,
manage
mm.
some of that. Do you sort of make use of that kind of things, like X cards and things of that nature?
Yeah, totally, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I don't. There was a time when it seemed a bit controversial. Again,
Mm,
if you look on social media, it seemed to be controversial. It's probably a bit of a dichotomy between the old school gamers, the old grognards from first edition, of which I was probably one of them. Those old grey bearded guys. Um, but I didn't. I never held that position. But
mm,
the idea that maybe there was a slight controversy, and I think that it's come from two things. One is I think when you're playing with friends, if your background is you're just playing with your friends, you probably maybe you don't need safety cards. Maybe you don't need
mm,
to think of these things because you know each other so well. You just know that. And I'm guessing, I could be wrong, but I'm guessing it's when you started having professional GMs coming in where they were playing with people who they didn't know, or things that we're doing, where we're doing it, we're not paid, we're doing it charitably, but again, we're playing with clients who we don't necessarily know.
mm,
And you just don't have that. You just don't instinctively know what is going to be a challenge to them. You don't know where they are in their life, what's just been happening to them. So it makes sense to have a system where you can just be sensitive to that. Also, specifically for ourselves, we're working with people with multiple vulnerabilities, and again, you don't want to say anything where it's going
sure.
to upset people. It's just about being thoughtful. So yeah, I think for all of our games we use. Um, it hasn't got necessarily be the safety card system. Well, it's a very good system, but I
Mm,
think you need to have some way of just being thoughtful and and allowing people to say, actually, I'm unhappy with this.
yeah.
If they even if they're your friend, you should have a way of people just going, look, I'm not enjoying this anymore. It is a game. I'm not enjoying the game.
Yeah.
So yeah. I
Yeah.
think maybe for some people it does seem controversial. I hope they would just think about it because it shouldn't be controversial, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. So Game Therapy UK, you set up this charity last year, I believe. So it's early
It
last
was
year, is that right?
registered last year. So
Registered
we had the
last year.
charity going. It takes about a year to get a charity registered in
Right.
the UK, which I think is reassuring.
Right.
You can rattle up a company, you can become a company overnight, but it does take a while to become a registered charity, which I think is a good thing. So yeah, so we were operating as an unregistered charity for a while,
Right.
whilst we were going through the process of being registered. Yeah, but
Right.
we've been registered for about a year now. Yeah.
Is it quite complex then? It sounds like there would be
Oh my
a
word.
lot to go
Yes.
through to. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got friends who are setting up various charities, all good causes,
Mm,
and they're coming to me saying, "Oh, I'm just thinking about setting up a registered charity," and I just literally I feel sick. You get this wave of nausea. It's so complicated.
right.
Good luck. Yeah, I think if you're setting up, because we're setting up kind of the health area, the health
Mm,
sphere, so I think that's probably more regulated. So it's
right.
it's harder. Again, reassuringly, it's much harder. If you're doing anything where we got the word therapy or therapeutic in the title, the Charities Commission, quite rightly, is
Mm,
much more diligent.
sure.
Um, it just means it takes about a year and a half to get registered, and it's a constant conversation backwards and forwards. But it's a helpful process. But if anybody's out there thinking of setting up a charity, well, first of all, just think twice. Maybe if but there is a huge responsibility once you have a registered charity, and,
Mm,
and maybe maybe you don't need a charity. Maybe you're setting up an organization. It could just be a community group. It doesn't need to be registered. Um, I think what I'm saying is if you don't need to be a registered charity, don't do it. It's a
Right.
huge amount of work, and then there's a huge onus on you to do that. We did need to be a registered charity. It's the appropriate thing for us to be. So we were very happy to do it.
Right.
But yeah, gosh, it's huge work. Huge work. Yeah.
Sure. And then that's so now as a sort of umbrella organization. I mean, what's like structurally, how do you guys work then? Do people come to you and sort of say, we've got this project, or are you starting new projects and bringing in like people to help run them? You know, what does the sort of what's the day to day of the charity work look like?
Yeah, yeah, good question. So it's both really. So so we see ourselves like an umbrella organization. And we've got our own kind of view on what we think therapeutic gaming is. So I think we think we want it to be very kind of democratic and very
Mm,
egalitarian. It's not about it being owned by a psychologist and we're telling, you have to come and see me, or, I'm not a psychologist. You have to come and see a psychologist, you have to come and
sure.
see a doctor and have something therapeutic. We, people who play games, just gamers, that process of playing game is therapeutic. I think our process is to go, what's the best way? Well, how can we advise you? What can we learn together?
Mm,
What's the best practice? What's the best way of doing this? What's the way of trying to avoid being toxic? If you do make a mistake and you tread on the landmine and you get something wrong, what's the best way to make a regain? So the whole
mm,
experience is fun for everybody and therapeutic.
mm,
So we do that, and then from a charity's point of view, we want to be as kind of light as touch as possible. It is, we are collaborative, so it's lots of different organizations, lots of different projects. I think we're there to support those projects,
mm,
and we can support those projects by bringing people together. So they're not constantly reinventing the wheel. We can provide peer support, peer mentoring. We provide practical things, so we can provide funding. We can go out and get funding centrally, and then give the funding to the projects. And pretty much all of the funding that we get, almost all, because we're all volunteers. Everyone in the charity is a volunteer. I'm a volunteer. The trustees are all volunteers. There's very few central costs, and so pretty much all the money that we raise just goes straight out of the project, which is,
right.
I think, a good thing for charity. Um, and so we can do that. And then the industry is incredibly generous. So we get lots of donations of miniature figures and dice and product. Again, they come to us centrally. We log it all, and then we can put it all out to the project. So it all goes out the project. So we can help with that. And I think the peer mentoring part is important. So we're supporting projects. If somebody wants to volunteer for us, when we do set up our own projects, so we do, we have an interest. So this year, for example, we've been setting up a lot of projects for young people and adults who are autistic. So that's been an interest this year. And also continuing on expanding projects that we started last year for people experiencing homelessness and for the military veterans. They're the big projects this year. Um, Also projects this year for we managed to get some funding for a young person's project. So we're looking at projects for young people with special educational needs. So we've got some funding for that. So we are setting up those projects.
Right.
And so if there are people out there who wanted to volunteer to help on those projects, let us contact us, just drop us an email and let us know where you are in the UK, because we're UK wide. Let us know what your interests are. Are you a gamer? Are you just a gamer? Because we need GMs. Or are you a teacher or have a clinical background that could be useful to us? And then when we've got a project near you, we'll feed you into those projects. The other thing we get is people contacting us going, we are a group. Look, we're a group. We're doing this project already with young people or adults. Can we have your help? And then we can try and help them. So the two things that we do, project, and that's kind of like 90% of the work that we do. Is the charity, we're just there to provide the governance and make sure it's well organized
Mm,
and I suppose a bit of kite marking as well. Make sure that the projects that we're working with are not toxic, that they're all
sure.
therapeutic. That's the main thing. And the other two elements are, we keep talking about research, evidence based. There isn't a huge amount of evidence. So one of the very important things that we're able to do as an organization is develop an evidence base. So we've got an academic faculty. We're working with several universities, a whole bunch of professors and doctors and academics, and they are making sure that the supporting good quality, rigorous, peer-reviewed academic research into therapeutic gaming. And as part of that, next year we're going to have a conference,
Right.
the therapeutic gaming conference, probably in Birmingham. We think we'll details to follow. and also a journal as well, an academic journal being published next year. And then that's the second thing, projects, the academic background. And then the third bit is education as well. One of our charitable aims is to educate people on what is evidence-based best practice in therapeutic gaming. So at the moment, we do any of our volunteers, we give them training in that. And I think we'll be expanding that throughout the year as well. As we get more experience, more evidence, we'll be able to do more training as well.
Right. That's great.
It's quite busy.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot.
Pretty full on. Yeah, yeah.
But so if I was like if I wanted to get involved or I was part of a community group, for instance, I could reach out and potentially
Yeah.
we could, and we'll
Yeah,
like,
so if they go to our website, they can just drop us an email. At the moment, all those emails come to me, and then I
right.
can sort of send them out to the various different groups. So we have a board of trustees, but underneath the board of trustees, we have several other sort of subcommittees. A subcommittee for people, for the projects for homelessness, a subcommittee for the Veterans Project, and so we can send things out to them, and they manage at a kind of operational level. They manage the projects for us.
Sure. I part of my background was in data analysis and some of that sort of stuff.
Oh,
So
cool.
I'm just curious about. So are you capturing now the sort of the long-term outcomes, the kind of metrics around, like, do you measure in any way the sort of the benefits?
Absolutely. So all of our projects have, oh my gosh, I'm going to totally build a geek out with you as well. Data. So all of our projects that we're setting up, we all have KPIs, key performance
Right.
indicators. We want to know, just metrics. So all of the projects, when we set them up, we will say, we want you, if we're going to give you some money to run a project, what we want is data. We want you to measure this, this, and this. And it could be simple things as in, engagement. How many people turned up? Do they enjoy the game? Are they turning up regularly? Or it could be more, specific. It could be there are various kind of validated scientific measurement tools. Looking at mental health and things. Maybe we're asking you to measure those things. And then what that allows us to do is, if you remember right at the very beginning, I was talking about, in the American experience. I'm maybe a bit unfair in America, but the experience was that they were often just doing tiny little projects with 5 clients and then extrapolating data from that. Because we're UK wide and because we're not in the marketplace, we're not private at all. We're very public and collegiate. And what we're able to do is be very cooperative. Is we can have huge amounts of data. So rather than having one group, we could have 100 groups, and we get huge amounts of data coming in, and that's incredibly valuable when you're looking at developing an evidence base. And because we're working with universities and have an academic faculty, we can also, as well as just getting data, key performance indicators, we can also set up research projects and, and again, ask questions of, we've got 100 different projects. Let's say we've got 100 different projects for autistic young people. We could be curious and go, I wonder why, ... I wonder, why, for example, I don't know what your experience is, but the population, the percentage of people who are autistic in the UK is supposed to be 1%. It's probably much higher than that. But if you think about gamers, I've never sat at a table yet of 4 or 5 gamers where at least one of those gamers doesn't identify as being neurodivergent. Maybe more, maybe all of them. It just seems to be hugely overrepresented. And I think we as a charity and the universities are quite curious about that. Why is it that neurodivergent people seem to be so overrepresented amongst gamers? So we can ask that question and we could do research projects and we can do it and examine, have hundreds of data points and start getting some answers. So it's quite exciting, I think.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, where does it sort of go? Where can you imagine it going? Because Game Therapy UK, you continue on this trajectory. What would the future be? A sort of an ideal vision for where the charity goes in the future?
I think it depends on where people want it to go. As I say, we are an umbrella organization, so we were guided by the people who play the games, really, where it's wherever they want to go. I think the direction is that they want to. I think they need. I think it's helpful having governance. I think it's helpful having kind of a kite mark because most people who are playing games therapeutically, just instinctively. The number of people who I met, we were at a games convention ourselves recently, last weekend, and I had people coming up talking to me all the time about therapeutic gaming. And when they were talking about it, you just think, I think what you're doing is right. I think instinctively, just because they were asking questions, they were saying, I don't want to do any harm. I want to, they were being thoughtful, and you go, I think you got it right. I think that's it. It's as simple as that. Just be thoughtful, be kind, be compassionate, and um, and be reflective. And that's probably a good way to start. And so most people are fine, but but there are always people out there who are not thoughtful, who are thoughtless, and what have you. And it'd be quite nice, I think, if we could have some kind of kite marking system, so we could say if you were a parent of a vulnerable child, or if you had a vulnerability yourself and you wanted to reach out and find a game, you could go to a game and go, I think this game's probably fine. It seems to be, it's been kind of approved or something.
Mm.
That would be a nice thing to do, I think, to help
Yeah,
vulnerable people. Just to raise the standard of gaming, I think. But
yeah,
it's whatever the people want to do. As I say, it's not for us to dictate it. We're kind of listening to the gamers, and we'll support them whatever they want to do.
sure, yeah. And just on that, I mean, are most of the games and the projects that you're supporting, are they online typically, or do you have a lot of projects that are physically like getting together in person?
Both. All of our games are co-created with our clients, so it's whatever they want to do. So, oh, there's your cat. So, I mean, some of the projects are face to face, and there's a huge benefit in that. I just love when we started playing when the charity kind of came out at the back end of COVID.
Mm.
So just to get, I hadn't been in a face to face game for ages because of COVID. And so the first face-to-face games I was in was with charity games. So I was, sitting playing with these people experiencing homelessness in Camden, and I love it. I still love it. It's a big part of my week to sit down with these people and who, have this fun game. And there's just something about sitting around a table in person, and getting your hands on a little miniature figure, a little toy. It's like a child. It's so childish. I love it. It's joyful. And painting in a group together. It's just brilliant. I love it. So there's something about being in a group that is extra special. But not everybody can get into groups face to face, and sometimes you don't want to. So, if projects are face to face, that's great. Some of our projects we set up online, and we kind of purposefully they're online. So, for example, two good examples would be one would be the veterans group. So the evidence is that if you're a veteran, being in the army seems to, or the military rather, seems to be protective. And then the people leave the military and they kind of go all over the country back to where they came from, having served. And then they're not necessarily isolated. They've got friends and family, but they're isolated from people who've had a similar experience to them. So they're isolated from their old community. And they geographically, they're all over the country. So you can bring them back together by doing a game online. So there's a group called Tactical Advanced to Game, a Game Therapy UK project where it's military personnel,
Right.
and they come together and play games online. And we have people from America playing games, and people, all over the world can play these games, military veterans and serving personnel. And that's really, really helpful. It's really beneficial. It brings, talk about social isolation, it brings people back together. Other groups might be, again, autistic adults or autistic young people. They may want to play face to face. That's lovely, but again, sometimes it might be their preference to play online.
Mm.
They find it easier to socialize that way. If things are overwhelming, they can just pretend that their internet's gone down and they can just walk away. They can close their laptop, it's gone. So sometimes people find it, they prefer to interact online. There's an advantage to that. So long answer to all your questions. Both. I think there's benefits to face, but there are real benefits of playing online as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that sort of D&D tends to get played quite a lot, and there was a couple of other games you mentioned as well. But is it like literally everything from an RPG perspective? Have you got projects covering all of the like pretty much everything's out there, or
Yeah, well, as I say, we're game agnostic. We would play any
yeah,
game. And some of the games we're looking at projects for next year, and they're definitely not going to be role play games. They're going to
right,
be tabletop games, because of the nature of the project. No, we look at any game. In fact, it's what tends to happen is we'll set up a project, and you do bring your own you do bring your own kind of prejudices to it. And I play D&D. I love D&D, but I would love to play something other than D&D. So when we're setting up projects, we're always kind of trying to do something other than D&D. And then it's up to the clients what they want to play. And if we introduce all these things, of course, they then say, "Go, that's great, that's great, that's great. Can we play Dungeons and Dragons?" You go, "Oh God, fine, okay, again." I love D&D, but we would play anything.
yeah,
We are looking at all projects, and including wargaming as well. We're looking at that. Yeah. personally, I love to play games other than new games. I like new games. Introduce new games. Fun.
Well, I think it sounds fantastic, Gary. And as you mentioned,
Um,
obviously people can come and check out the website and drop you an email. I'll put those details in the description below so people
thank you.
can get
Brilliant.
in
Thank
touch
you.
with you. But I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about it, Gary. Thank you.
Oh, it's so kind. Thank you very much. It's been lovely chatting.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
Huge thanks to Gary for chatting to me about the amazing work that he and Game Therapy UK are doing to help address all of those challenges out in the wider world. If you want to find out more or to get involved, then I've included a link to Game Therapy UK's website down in the description below. It's really worthwhile, so do check it out if you're interested. You can also check out my Patreon if you would like to support the work that I do here on the channel. And of course, liking, sharing, and subscribing are all incredibly important as well. So thank you if you're able to do any of that. You can also now listen to my interviews as podcasts. So go to your favourite podcatcher and search for In Conversation with Jordan Sorcery, and you should be able to find it. Thank you once again to Gary. Thank you for watching and listening. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.